Hi, welcome back to my course on the Scrum framework. In this section, we shall discuss about the purpose of Scrum. Now, when it relates to the purpose of Scrum, Scrum has been used to develop complex products since the early 90s. And Scrum is a framework, which means it employs various other processes and techniques within itself in order to deliver these products. But what does a complex product really mean? And what theory is Scrum actually based on? What values must a Scrum team exhibit in order to make sure that these products are being delivered and they are valuable to the customers? In this section, we shall deep dive into these topics. Scrum is based on the empirical process control theory, or empiricism. Empiricism requires that at regular intervals, the process feeds some inputs based on which the plans may be adapted in the future. This is based on the three pillars of empiricism: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Transparency in Scrum comes from the artifacts. It is necessary that the crucial aspects of this process is available to the key stakeholders of this entire process. At regular intervals, it is required that the Scrum team inspects these artifacts and based on these inspections, adapt the execution plan. During inspection, care must be taken to make sure that the inspection does not happen so frequently that it affects the progress of the entire team. An inspector usually determines if one or more aspects of the process has deviated beyond control and then makes adjustments to minimize the deviation. Scrum provides 4 formal events for inspection and adaptation: sprint planning, sprint retrospective, sprint review, and the daily Scrum. The usual question that comes up is, who inspects and who adapts? Every Scrum event has defined elements that have to be inspected and the people who are responsible for inspecting it. For example, the daily Scrum is an event where the sprint backlog is inspected by the development team and the plan is again updated in the sprint backlog by the development team. So care needs to be taken that if there are certain stakeholders during the daily Scrum who are not responsible for this inspection adaptation, do not disturb the process. This is usually taken care by the Scrum Master. But then again, it is not necessary for the Scrum Master to attend the daily Scrum, which means that the Scrum Master has to teach the development team to stay within the time box and make sure that external disturbances do not impact the inspection adaptation of the sprint backlog during the daily Scrum. We'll take a look at how this can be managed when we discuss specific events. For now, let's move on to understand why do we really need empiricism? And the short answer is to build complex products. What is a complex product? A complex product, in a simple sense, is a product where you have more unknowns than knowns. But how do you determine if there is a product that you're building which has more unknowns than knowns? There are a few frameworks which you can utilize in order to assess this. You can have the Kinnevian framework, which basically tells you if a particular problem lies in the simple, complicated, complex, or chaotic domain. There's also the chaos report by the Standish group, which determines how you actually figure out if you are working in the complex domain. Let's consider that there are 3 constraints which you need in order to identify your domain. You have if you know the problem well or not, you need if you know the solution well or not, and then you need the skills. Let's consider these 3 constraints to identify what a complex problem means. Let's say that you want to change a light bulb. The problem is pretty simple. It's defined. You have to change a light bulb. You understand what the problem is. There is only one solution to it. You purchase a light bulb, you unscrew the old one, and you screw the new one. Do you need any specific skills for this? Not really. Maybe a ladder. Since you know the problem, you know the solution, and no specific skills are required, you're basically falling in a simple problem domain. Let's consider the complicated domain. Let's consider that you want to provide some kind of level 1 support. You usually know the problem because the problem is written in a manual which you have to refer to provide the solution. So you know the problem, you know the solution, you may still need certain skills in order to tell the user what the problem is and how they can resolve it by themselves. These kinds of problems will fall in the complicated domain. Now consider the third one. In this particular scenario, let's say that you're building a software. Now usually when you're building the software, the vision that is provided is that you want to solve a certain problem. But the problem is not really the problem that you need to address. The problem is where the organization wants to see themselves in a few years. in which case you have to probe into the problem and understand what is the root cause of the problem before you can provide a solution. So in this case, the problem is unknown. So if the problem is unknown, the solution will obviously be unknown, and you need specific skills in order to probe into these solutions and these problems. This is where the complex problem domain lies. And if you have more unknowns than knowns, you're basically in a complex domain. Now, why would you need empiricism in a complex domain? Because in a complex domain, you need to identify where you are and then adapt what you want to do next. What happens if you actually try and address a complex domain with simplistic frameworks? Let's say a simpler one, waterfall. The feedback cycle that you really require in order to assess your progress and then adapt to it simply becomes longer and longer based on your phase gate model. If you utilize Scrum, you can frequently inspect your progress and adapt to the situation, and your sprint, which is a month or less, can actually reduce the risk that you employ in, say, other methods like waterfall. It is important to identify in which domain your problem lies. Say, for example, applying Scrum in a domain that is not complex. Does it really affect? Well, not really. You can still solve a problem using Scrum which is not in the complex domain, but it brings its own overheads. Take, for example, do you really want to utilize Scrum framework in order to change a light bulb? Think about that. And it's probably easier to get the answers if your problem actually lies in the complex domain, if your team exhibits certain behaviors. Let's discuss about these behaviors in the next section with Scrum Values. Let's start this section with one of my favorite books, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. If you're aware with his work, he basically provides a triangle of all the dysfunctions that a team might have and has 5 levels. The very first level is absence of trust. Believe it or not, but this is one of the dysfunctions that most of the teams have most of the times in every organization. There are others as well. You have fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. Let's say that your team has these dysfunctions as well. How would you resolve these? Well, Scrum teams and Scrum theory provides Scrum values in order to address these dysfunctions. And there are 5 values in Scrum. You have commitment, focus, courage, openness, and respect. Every Scrum team member is committed towards results. This is one of the values that is slightly misunderstood. Let's consider that we are at a sprint planning meeting. Usually we say that the team commits to the amount of work that has to be done in a particular sprint. That becomes one of the points that whatever we have said during the sprint planning meeting must be completed by the end of the sprint. Yeah, that is the plan, but it may not happen. Take, for example, let's say that you are one of the team members of the basketball team. Now, your team is supposed to play at a league that has 20 games, and in order for you to win the finals, you have to win at least 17 games. Let's say that the team was unable to win 17 games and won only 16. The 4 games which the team lost, can you name one of the team members who was not committed during that game? It's hard to say. The team members are always committed during deliveries. They are committed to provide results. There are reasons why that may not happen. That does not mean that the team is not committed. And this is one of the Scrum values. Let's take a look at focus. Every sprint has a goal. And it is important to make sure that this sprint goal is not endangered. Whenever someone approaches the team with a request, and if that request lies outside of the sprint goal, the team has the right to ask them to step back. This is what defines focus. And in order to do that, they need courage. Every Scrum team member has the courage to do this. They are open with their conversations with all their stakeholders and the product owner, and they make sure that they do all of these things in a respectful environment. This is what becomes the Scrum values, and every team member is expected to imbibe these values. Let's understand what are the advantages of these values. Commitment. Teams which are committed to results do better. We have seen that happen all the time, and humans are complex. These are the aspects which make a difference between a successful and an unsuccessful product. Focus. Sprints are small. We need to focus on something that gives true value. If everything in your product backlog is valuable, then everything is equally not valuable. Focus is something that helps you move towards progress. Courage. And this can only happen if you respect each other's views and make sure that the only thing that is benefiting out of all the conflicts is the product, and that is on the path of progress. So those are the 5 values of Scrum: commitment, focus, courage, openness, and respect. To summarize, in this section we discussed the empirical process model and why it is necessary to have this for building complex products. We also looked at the Scrum Values, which is necessary to build the right products in the right way. In the next section, we'll address what are the various Scrum elements that helps us achieve this purpose of Scrum.